I can't wait for today's podcast. I can't wait to hear your interview with Tim Smith, because I've only heard a little bit and it sounded wonderful.
You've had a little taste, haven't you?
Little taster.
Yeah, sounds
We're
good.
on podcast 44 and it's raining. So we have a farmer in the Wiggly sitting room, sat on the Wiggly sofa.
Yeah.
He's not very clean though, is he?
I
No.
just dragged him off the combine.
No, actually, I can just see the whites of your eyes.
Yeah. What have you been up to this morning, Phil? I've just dragged you away from underneath your combine.
Yeah, we're cleaning down. We've just started combining peas, which are vining peas for seed, so that next year some farmers will plant what we've produced to produce your green peas for your frozen peas from the freezer.
Right. Excellent.
I do feel I'm getting edged out a bit here, actually. Last week was the Combine special.
Yeah.
This week's the Tim Smith special. Come on.
Yeah.
No,
Who's the megastar?
you got to keep it.
He's a megastar, yeah.
I'm going to read out, because your Combine podcast was so good, we've got a bit of feedback.
All right.
And I found this wonderful podcast in America called geekfarmlife.com. And they've got 10 acres out in America, and they say this: I've just listened to your podcast from the tractor cab. It was really cool. The grass seed is really interesting. I don't think anyone in these parts does it at all. Andrew. And the second one is on the iTunes reviews, and we've now got 10, and this has raised us to an average of 5 stars.
Right.
Wow.
Right. Excellent.
And it says, wiggling with fun, 5 stars. It's good to listen to people with such a warm love of everything countryside. I live in sunny Dorset and I can really relate to the great adventures that go on. It's full of handy little nuggets of information as to how everyone can make a difference by helping to understand more about native wildlife. Well, I'm off to hitch a ride on a combine. Keep up the good work. Stavros. And the other one says they really like listening to the Wiggly podcast on the Tube in London.
Brilliant.
And it's always nice to have good reviews, but it is important to have a balance. And as a small business entrepreneur, I must say that sometimes you do get corkingly awful moments.
Yes. Yeah. A bit of a tricky one, wasn't it, last week?
We had our worst letter of our whole 16-year life. And I've just got to read a bit out to you. And I know you're a bit worried about me telling all these listeners this in case they believe we're utterly rubbish.
Yeah. Yeah, has to be a balance, I guess.
It says, this is from Mrs. Chapman. I won't say where because she probably hates us. Sorry, Mrs. Chapman. We sent her a catalogue. It says, I return the above catalogue to you as I will not be placing any orders with your company. Not with 10% off? Not even with 50% off. I enclose correspondence to your company by way of explanation. And this poor woman has sent a ream of problems, and I don't know quite what happened, nor does Rach, but she fell through the loop
She did.
of Wiggly service.
Yeah, she did.
Out the other end, crashed on the floor.
Yeah.
But you'll be pleased to hear that we have fully refunded Mrs. Chapman, won't say where she is, and sent her a bunch of flowers. So I hope we fixed it.
Yeah.
If we haven't, sorry anyway. Sometimes...
It's interesting. It's good though, isn't it? It's a good, I guess it gives us a sense of perspective, brings you back down to earth sometimes.
Well, we had a tipping point meeting, didn't we?
We did.
And we said, right, what can we address that we're going to improve? And the first thing we've done is cleaned up your office space.
He's not very happy about it.
I thought we'd
messy
finished
boy.
that. I thought I'd finished that, and I was away yesterday. I thought, oh, that's great, because I can get in this morning and it'll all be tickety-boo. No, there's still piles of stuff and orders. Rachel's first thing Rach said to me is, Rich, can you start taping wires under your desk and putting files away and move this to there and so on and so forth? And I guess it's ultimately it's going to benefit everybody.
Well, you and I are creative souls, and so we live in a tip in the office.
Yeah.
And as everyone has told us, including Jenny Steele, one must be organised,
Bit of order.
tidy to be efficient.
Yeah.
And obviously, you can see with Mrs. Chapman's letter, ream of it as it is, we've let her down.
Yeah.
And so we're going to put our house in order and move on.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I can't wait for the next bit. On we go, wiggling to Cornwall with Ricardo with his roving microphone interviewing one of my heroes, Tim Smith from the Eden Project.
Hello, Tim.
Hello.
What I should say is thank you very much first for agreeing to have a chat with me. We've come and sat outside the main offices that
Our foundation
above
building.
Eden Foundation.
Yeah, it's our foundation building, yeah.
Right. If we sort of negotiated our way 20 yards that away, we'd be looking right down into the clay pits, wouldn't we, above the biomes?
You would. In fact, if we cut down all these trees in front of us, we'd see it as well.
Yeah, that's right. There are many reasons. There are many reasons I wanted to speak to you, and there are several things I wanted to ask you. I first saw you and managed to accost you at Chelsea Flower Show, and you kind of wandered past, and I recognised you. I've never met you before, and it did occur to me then. I wondered why you'd gone to Chelsea Flower Show and what you thought of, English gardening culture.
Yeah, well, I mean, I try to get to Chelsea every year because it's a good chance to meet up with mates who are in horticulture. Also like to see the frivolity that goes on there.
Right.
And it makes me crosser and crosser every year I go.
Right.
And I think it's good. I mean, I think there's an awful lot of good stuff. It's just that every year this accessorising of Great Britain gets even more manic. You see all these toffee-nosed people trying to sell you a different class of gumboot and brass-plated gardening forks and all that nonsense.
Yeah.
And when I'm in a good mood, it makes me laugh. And when I'm in a bad mood, I think, what a waste of life. What a waste of life. But the quality of horticulture, I mean, one thing that's really difficult, I mean, as a Dutchman by birth, you've got to remember is that although the Dutch are fantastic at growing things, under glass and what have you, and with the tulip fields, the Brits are probably the number ones in the world for doing interest in absolutely everything. The Dutch are specialists, the British are fantastic generalists.
Right.
And their sort of chaotic approach to life creates great gardening.
Right, and it's interesting. I mean, do you think that there's English people's perspectives and what they're trying to achieve from gardening is different to the Dutch?
Oh, very much. There are very few great gardens in Holland.
Right.
There are a number of famous ones, the royal palaces, and you get people like Piet Oudolf and his ecological gardening in some of the parks and things like that.
Right.
But there isn't a great. You've got the neat front gardens like you would in suburbia gone mad, and lots of greening, but. Gardening is an art form? No, not really.
Right. That's interesting, isn't it? And I'm just wondering, as part of your background, how old were you when you came over to the UK?
Well, my mother's English.
Right. Okay.
And I was sent to school in England when I was 7. My father was with the Dutch airline KLM, and he was posted to foreign parts, so they didn't have either English or Dutch schools. So I was sent to an English prep school and then an English public school, and managed to loathe almost every minute of it.
Right.
But I speak good English, don't I?
You do. Your English is impeccable. Yeah, I think your English is almost certainly going to be better than your Dutch, is it?
I speak my Dutch with a very English accent.
I'm sure you do.
Hugely embarrassing.
Yeah. I mean, how did you aspire? How does anybody aspire to be able to create something as significant as Eden? What was your interest? Was your interest always natural history when you were a young man, or is it something that developed through the courses of other situations, other developments in your life?
Now, I've got no background in horticulture at all. I mean, my granny used to have a walled garden, my English granny in Cheshire, from which I remember the smell of cut box hedge, raiding raspberry canes, and taking eggs from underneath chickens, and that's all I remember of it.
Right.
No, I think when people talk to me about aspiring to do something big, I've always loved big.
Right.
And my days in the rock industry taught me that actually people are more excited by big than small.
Yeah.
And I find that when it sounds a funny thing to say, but it is actually a lot more easy to get people excited and surrounding a concept if it's bigger than themselves.
Right.
It's just the principle that it's much more difficult to raise £50,000 than it is $5 million.
Right. Yes. But a lot of people wouldn't recognise that, of course.
No, I've always had self-confidence.
Yeah.
Because I've always come at the world from a perspective which I wish a lot of others did, which is that if you love something yourself and you're not a freak, there will be millions of people like you. Right. Which means that therefore the whole issue is just to let people know about it, and then they'll come. Yeah. And that happened at Heligan. I mean, when I started at the Lost Gardens at Heligan, there were gardens in Cornwall, some very fine gardens, but they were the most visited was, I think, had 80,000, and most of them around 20,000. Right. And when I restored Heligan, we were up at about 400,000 people. Right. So I understood the rock and roll aspects of it in terms of marketing it, the good name, and then actually making damn sure when people came, they not only had a good time, but it really was as good as you said. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people get it wrong. That is all important, isn't it? A lot of people get it wrong because they get into hype, not realising that hype leads to people buying a record once and never buying another one, or coming to visit you once and never coming back. Right. And a great place is a place that people just love when they come, and they want to come back and back and back and back. Yeah. And the only way you can run something like that is to make it as you believe it should be. Right. With no compromise. Yeah.
How did you begin here, though? What was the kind of nucleus? What was the catalyst? What made you recognise that there was an opportunity to create something that could give an example of so many different habitats from all over the world and plop it into a china clay pit in Cornwall?
The idea was very easy. I sometimes go to places and people say, "Oh, Tim, you're so visionary." And I say, you show me a 12-year-old anywhere in the world that hasn't dreamt of building ridiculous Mad Ludwig castles or extraordinary things.
Yeah.
As a 12-year-old, you dream of all that stuff. The visionary bit, if that's the right word, was to believe that you could persuade 300 people who are professionally trained to say no, to say yes.
Right.
That was the daunting bit.
Yes,
but the idea actually, a very simple gestation. I was learning to love the stories about plants, not knowing much about plants. So I came at them with a very innocent eye and asked people about their stories, and then people would tell me their stories, and I'd say, that's too complicated for me, make it stupider. And they would, and then I'd understand it, and then I'd go and excite other people who weren't interested in plants about it. And then I realised that you could make people who didn't think they liked plants or nature or anything, they're excited if you get the language right.
Right.
I was also very much inspired by the way that Roald Dahl tells stories, sort of the horrible, the ugly, the threatening and nasty.
Yeah.
So I started talking to school groups about poisons and how they burnt through your stomach lining and choked you to death, and how you could stop someone screaming as they're still pumping heart was being ripped out of their chest cavity.
Right.
And after that, the kids were just mine. They had to do with as I wished.
Yeah.
And that linking between stories and the theatre of what we've got here at Eden was actually made, I suppose, if there was one moment. I've been thinking about the Clay District anyway, because it's a very depressed area, had been a very depressed area. And if you go back to 94, that was the last year they had a garden festival at Ebbw Vale.
Right.
And that was the last of the garden festivals. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to raise a lot of money for Cornwall to put on a garden festival? That's where it actually began, in the Clay District.
Right.
And then, as I was thinking about that, I was driving along the A30 to the first traffic jam at Innis Downs.
Yeah.
And on the left-hand side of the road there, the southern side of the road, as the sun sets on a summer's evening, it takes on a kind of reddish hue, a bit like Ayers Rock, Uluru in Australia.
Right.
And I was looking at this thing, and it's cut like a ziggurat, one of those Aztec temples. And I was suddenly put in mind of volcanoes and the craters of volcanoes and lost civilizations and great engineering and great horticulture and great arts and technology. And there it was, bang, in one go. It was just there, and suddenly I realized, that's what we got to do.
Right. And I mean, it wasn't easy, was it? I mean, it hasn't been a bit of a journey for you, really, because I know there were all sorts of problems initially with certainly structurally, and I guess financially there must have been.
Financially, there were huge problems because we didn't have much money, and Helligan had to put up the money early on because the state only supports things it will believe will be successful,
right?
Or their state investments anyway. And to get it to a stage where anybody could believe it was successful required us to spend nearly £700,000 from Helligan, which was a hell of a risk, especially when you bear in mind that the building we were going to build at Eden was going to be owned by the nation.
Right.
But I just had this sense that I had to do it. It was like maybe it was a bit like Don Quixote, tilting at windmills. I just felt that having said I was going to do it, we were going to do it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the reason we got funding was a mixture of talking to civil servants and asking them what they wanted to have written on their tombstone.
Right.
And bankers, because we're the only charity in the country that's ever had a big bank loan, because Cornwall's so poor it couldn't give us any money or land. We had to raise all of that ourselves, the portion you would expect the council put in. And ultimately we got a big bank loan, and the reason the bank gave us the loan was because they felt that if we'd taken so much risk with our own money, we were going to make damn sure that it was successful.
Right.
So it was actually the risk-taking itself that attracted them to us.
Right.
So it was a problem. I mean, I had very, very good people alongside me. I mean, I had a lady called Gay Coley who had been finance director at Plymouth University, and before that she'd been in private business, and she was fantastic at putting all the legalese and structure together. So we actually had a bit of a floozy and bogs where I would be joshing doing that male bonding thing,
right,
and she'd be getting the legalese right.
Sounds like the ideal scenario.
Yeah, but I mean, Eden is the greatest collection of people with a midlife crisis ever gathered together in one spot. I mean, if you look through all my senior guys and gals, they're all people who had very successful jobs elsewhere, who made a positive choice to give them up and come and work here.
Right.
And they could earn fortunes elsewhere and don't here.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, that is a classic example of how people are beginning to aspire to the fact that the quality of life is considerably better than spending 3/4 of your life miserable and the other quarter spending lots of money that you've earned through being miserable.
Exactly, and I think one of the things that is little understood is that men and women need an adventure in their lives.
Yeah.
And if you can provide an adventure, there's just, it's the Irish word, the crack.
Yeah.
If you can provide a crack which is both exciting and for a good cause, it's an absolute winner.
Yeah.
But I have the privilege.
Totally right.
When I come to work, I like everybody I work with.
Right. Yeah, I guess I do as well, really, but lots of people don't, do they?
No. Well, most people spend half their life wondering what they're good at. They may be successful bankers or whatever, but they have this little bit of darkness inside them, and they wonder whether maybe they were meant to be the world's greatest map maker, or whether they're meant to be an Atlantic sailor or a gardener even.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you and I, though our lives are completely different in many respects, I think we're both incredibly fortunate that we've found a proper sense of direction, I guess, and a niche, possibly. Where do you go from here, though? I mean, having created what you've done, what are your aspirations now? I mean, are you content to carry on and grow organically, or have you got lots of other ideas? I mean, you must have other ideas, but have you got the energy to commit to those other ideas?
Am I looking ill?
Yeah, you look perfectly well.
No, there are a couple more things I want to do here at Eden, and then we would have finished the so-called stage, and then the challenge is whether we can put on the stage things that inspire people. I mean, at the moment, we attract 1.25 million people a year, every year coming in, and that's a great thrill to have such a crowd, to entertain and educate. That's the right word. That sounds a bit patronising. To edutain might be the right word. That's what the destination does, but behind it, the building we're in here, which is called the Foundation, is full of scientists and regeneration people who are interested in using the medium of the pit to tell stories about how we can regenerate other areas. And that's what we're actually about, real change.
Right.
So when people, I don't mind being called a theme park if people understand the word, the theme we're taking is life itself, but it's actually a very serious scientific foundation, albeit the world's first rock and roll foundation.
Yeah.
But when you say what do I want to do, there's one more major building I want to build, which is going to be called the Edge.
Okay.
Which is, I hope, going to be one of the most important buildings on Earth, and it's just so exciting. It makes me quite goosebumps.
Right.
And the idea is that we want to build these giant underground chambers, which will be lit by torches, and you go in there, and we will invite 12 of the world's greatest thinkers to curate each one, i.e. one per chamber.
Okay.
And the idea is that they have got to interpret their last will and testament from a dying planet to those who might come afterwards in terms of the lessons we should have learned from history but didn't.
Right.
The idea, the proposition being that as we walk through it, we are the next generation and have to take inspiration from what is said inside them.
Okay. It's pretty spunky stuff, really.
Well, that then leads into floodlights, which will blind you for 30 seconds when you've gone through those chambers because you'll be in the darkness at the time.
Right.
And then you come out into a biome, which will be the dry tropics.
Okay.
And what that is about is the dry tropics we've chosen because they're symbolic of living within limits. You have to live within limits in the dry tropics.
Yeah.
And those are the lessons that we're going to have to learn for ourselves in the future, how to live within limits, not necessarily all in a dry tropics condition, but our whole culture is going to have to change over the next 50 years to look at the way we live in a very different way, to understand that continuous growth is not an option.
Right.
And
it's not an option, is it? And I don't think human society realises that, although we may realise it and just can't figure out a way of doing anything other than keep growing.
Yeah, but I like to. I know it's a glib statement, but I see our role as creating a spirit of war in a time of peace.
Right.
I believe humans are only capable of massive change if a situation is created by good leadership, where people all agree to change various habits.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I actually think we can affect massive change very quickly. People are incredibly adaptable once they believe that everybody's adapting in the same way.
I think we can, certainly, but do we really want to? Do we have sufficient strong leadership in the world to be able to affect those changes as quickly as are achievable?
Well, in a way, one of the things about the environment movement that I like is that a lot of members of it come across, as having very holy jumpers and open-toed sandals and eating nut cutlets,
right,
and wringing their hands about the doom and gloom. I don't mind the doom and gloom so much, because a bit of doom and gloom, I think, concentrates the mind most wonderfully.
Yeah.
You see, the way I look at it is, if we trash the world, fine, that's great, trash it. we're supposed to be called Homo sapiens. If we trash it, that is a living example of our arrogance for having called ourselves so wise.
Right. That's absolutely right. I mean, I'm kind of inclined to think that the human species are a bit like algae in a pond. So you have an algae bloom, and it proliferates to such an extent that it's completely overpopulated the pond, depletes all the nutrients in the pond, and suddenly it dies, completely dies. Now that's obviously something that happens very, very quickly in the big scheme of things. But in many respects, the way human beings are going, we're replicating that situation, but on a slightly slower scale. So we're killing ourselves by smoking as opposed to harakiri or something. You know, that would be the analogy that I.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if we kill ourselves, it doesn't really. In the scheme of things, it doesn't actually matter. I mean, we have this wonderful arrogance that humans are the end of the evolutionary life chain,
right?
And we're quite obviously not.
No.
And we spend most of our time questioning the meaning of life and worrying about there's no meaning of life, and then artificially creating reasons for the meaning of life. But I think that actually that urge to find a reason for living is actually the thing that will save us.
Right.
Because I think most people, whether they recognise it or not, let's not call it religious, because I don't mean it in a religious sense, but they have a spiritual need to belong, to be part of something.
Yeah.
And I think the stories we need to tell for the future are about. So that was a tractor going past. Are about giving us meaning, about letting us understand that maybe we should, to be happy, live with the grain of nature.
Right.
And I think that is the great challenge for our civilization, to prove whether it was worth having, is whether we can come out of the industrial age and exploiting resources very cleverly, made unbelievable leaps forward. But we've always believed that technology is going to, any problem we create, we believe that we'll invent another technology.
Yeah.
When all the evidence is that each time a new technology is created to deal with the problem of the first technology, the new technology's got another problem that another form of technology is then going to be needed to deal with.
Right.
And I think that the end point of that is when we realise it's actually going to be about our lifestyles.
Yeah.
If you think about it, the great changes in human society, we talk about history when you went to school, when I went to school, right? History begins in Britain with the Romans, because they wrote things down.
Sure.
Yeah, you got the chapter in the beginning of the book about prehistory, which is actually wonderfully arrogant, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's prehistory, but history starts with the Romans, and then you get to do the Romans and the Anglo-Saxons and so on, and you go through the Dark Ages, the whole thing right up to the present day. But actually, I would contend that every major transformation in Homo sapiens took place before history began. Everything that's happened since the Romans is actually of marginal significance.
Right.
We were wildish creatures that discover caves and learn to paint and have imagery of ourselves in the Paleolithic. Then in the Mesolithic, we develop a Bedouin lifestyle. We become much better hunters. Our brains become more acute, and we then start to think about life after death and burying people and giving them funerary goods. Right. But we're now living on the land. We then have this period, the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, which is, when you talk to most people, they talk about the dawning of civilization in the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. And this fantastic idea that it was settlement that made us civilized. And every human you meet believes this to be true.
Right.
And yet with settlement, what you get is a massive increase of population, a massive controlling force of predominantly male power controlling, increasing routes of resource going out.
Yeah.
And the theory goes that, it's the surpluses created by that settlement that then enabled the arts to flourish, and mathematics and science, and the great flowering of what we call civilization. Yet civilization after civilization would collapse after that.
Right.
And you've got to ask yourself whether the big question is, was settlement what we were meant to do? It's a really big question. I mean,
it's not a question that anybody can answer.
No, but what do you think is happening to us? 99% of all the time that Homo sap's been on Earth, we've been hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
And we're now, in a very short period of time, I think about postage stamp thickness on top of the Empire State Building, we're now so-called civilized and living the way we are now. What do you think that's doing to us? What do you think we're repressing? What do you think urges and desires are being completely messed up by the way we live?
I would say that there are many urges and desires. I think we live in an incredibly sterile, disinfected society, but
also alienated from itself.
Absolutely, but purely because of the information that we've got at our disposal, which is why I guess things like Eden are so significant, because they are in many respects still peripheral to most people's lifestyles.
But you put on we do a lot of theatre here. We do a lot of lantern parades and things in the winter. And in the winter we have up to 3,000 people a night coming around and taking part in these things. And you see these people and they'll all say to you, God, it's fantastic having events where a whole bunch of people are doing things together.
Right.
And yet they then go home and everybody lives in their little house and no one actually... Very few places have any sense of community, really. I mean, we live here in Cornwall and there is much more of it here than in many parts of Britain that I know. But even so, community is often quite a ritualised sense of, oh, I've got to do my duty up at the school, you know, or something once a year doing a litter pick or whatever. And yet the word community comes from the roots of it are communos. Com meaning together and munos in gift.
Right.
Because a great community is actually one where everybody is in debt to each other because of gift giving, because of services rendered to each other. So nobody knows what the balance is, so everybody looks after each other.
Right.
And those words are... That's another tractor, by the way. But a very big tractor, that one. That's one of my great bugbears, is the way that politicians and people talk about community, the community of this, the community of that. And all they mean is a geography with a bunch of people in it, as opposed to the emotional responses those people have one to another.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Okay, I think we're on a obviously slightly smaller scale, but Wiggly Wigglers, because of the situation we're in a very rural part of Herefordshire. In fact, I'm the furthest travelled to work, to base. Most people live within 4 or 5 mile radius, or even on the doorstep, literally a kind of...
Were they kind of homeless or what?
30-minute walk, yeah. So we can definitely appreciate those kind of perspectives. But I'm wondering, having said all that, how many visitors do you have a year now? 1.5 million?
1.23 million at the moment, last year.
So that's incredibly impressive volume of people. How many, is it possible to quantify the amount of people that are going to come here and appreciate the information that they're going to be able to glean from a visit here and take home and have an impact on their lifestyle, so change elements of their lifestyle as a consequence of having visited Eden? I mean, is that quantifiable?
No.
Whether people will be able to do that?
No. What you'd normally get at a point like this would be the chief executive bullshitting. We can't determine that. What we do know is that 44% of all the people who come here say that coming to Eden was the major reason for them coming to the West Country.
Right.
Which is a hell of a high percentage as a reason. In terms of changing people's activities and the way they live, I think there's a misconception about Eden. One of the things that we don't do is tell people how to lead their lives. No. We don't even give them brochures to say 10 handy tips on composting, or you could have low energy light bulbs.
That's very true, actually. Yeah.
We don't do that. I will not do that. If you reduce the debate down to a few consumption items that will change your life, you miss the whole point. That's what everybody's doing. Government is talking about sustainability at the moment, and they do it in this silo thing. Let's talk about energy, let's talk about waste, let's talk about this, that, and that, which is exactly the old thinking that we're trying to fight against. Because the issue isn't recycling or energy or anything. Those are all symptoms, but the causes of all these things lie in the communities around the country not having a philosophy by which to live. You can't address all these issues as if they were little acts. I can recycle my wine bottles, I can recycle my paper. Sure, you can do all that, and that's very useful, and you don't want to talk people out of it. But ultimately it boils down to a huge act of will about what should our civilization look like. And that's why we don't tell people what to do, because what I actually want people to feel is optimistic. I want them to leave here feeling optimistic that people like them, ordinary people, have built something amazing, and that just makes them think about what they might do in their community. But we don't want to tell them what it is, we want them to be thinking. Right,
that does make sense, certainly. And I know, when I came into the building earlier on, I was talking to a lady that works here, and I asked her whether she had any children, because I wanted to find out whether any of her children worked here or part of Eden as well, because I know that Eden does employ and provides opportunity for communities, in the near vicinity, that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to have such an interesting working life. So, from that perspective, it's hugely important in bolstering the local economy and sustaining this part of Cornwall. However, people have got issues. I know. I mentioned this to you earlier on. I was talking to a friend of yours, or an associate of yours.
No, he used to be a friend until he made his comments.
That's right. Oliver Baines. He's a lovely chap, and he spoke very highly of you as well. He has a few issues with Eden, but he also thinks that Eden is a fantastic place. But he has a few issues in Eden. One being the volume of traffic that it attracts, and another being the size of Eden. So this size is in contrast with other attractions or whatnot that exist in Cornwall. So he has those 2 points for something that stuck out in my mind that he talked about. Oliver was, as you know, Chief Executive of Cornwall RCC. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts were about the volume of traffic that you do attract here.
Yeah, 80% of our visitors come here by car. 20% don't, which is, I think, the second highest of any leisure destination in Europe that is outside of a major city where you can't tell, which is a pretty amazing thing considering the appalling rural transport there is around here.
Right.
All I would say is this. I mean, it makes me laugh when you come up with hippie shit environmentalism about cars,
Sure.
when actually most of the people who make that criticism have a car themselves. And what I would say is that people come here and they stay for 5 hours. They drive here, yeah, sure, but they would have driven somewhere else because they were on holiday with a car.
Yeah.
Therefore, if they've driven here and had a day which makes them think about various things, it is far better than if they'd driven to other places and not thought at all and possibly been bored and then driven to yet other places. I think, actually, I don't wish to be defensive about it. I wish we had a fantastic rural transport system so we could bring people in here without cars. But I do have a beef with some of the theories about it. You know, why don't you build a park and ride? I've never heard anything more stupid in my life. Because people say, why don't you build a park and ride? Well, sucker, if you build a park and ride, why don't people then drive to somewhere else altogether, which could be your site anyway?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's absolute lunacy.
It
drives me crazy. Look, I wish that people didn't have to drive here, but I think it becomes kind of holy rollerish to be anti the car at a time when there is no alternative to it, because you can't do anything about it. And then I think the only thing that you've got to say to people like Oliver is, would you rather Eden didn't exist and didn't have its message, just wasn't here, which would mean there'd still be a derelict hole in the ground and there'd be 500 less jobs as a practical thing, and there would be £150 million going into his beloved rural communities a year at Cornwall, which is double the entire money that comes from Europe for the Southwest, just coming off the Eden project.
Right.
Would you rather that, or what?
Or nothing, yeah, that's right. No.
Well, my kids went to local schools, and I talk to a lot of schools around here. Almost all the kids used to have to leave Cornwall to get jobs.
Yeah.
And since Eden's been built, a whole lot of other businesses are set up in Cornwall. So there's a young culture for the first time in probably 200 years. People are moving to Cornwall to make a way in their career rather than to be at the sunset of it.
Yeah.
That's an incredible achievement for Cornwall over this period of time. So I think one's got to weigh it all up, that I think economic life is hugely important, and if our life is sustainable here, accepting the transport and the carbon offsets that might need to be done for that, but if you'd say on balance, how else would you create this sort of job ratio for the money that's been invested, doing something that's actually really good?
Right.
Do I sound defensive?
No, well, defensive is good because you have to be defensive. It would be unnatural if you weren't defensive. But I think
the trouble is, I'm actually lying because I feel aggressive.
I think you've been defensive in a really structured fashion. So,
what an elegant retort. The other point that Oliver makes about is it appropriate to Cornwall? Does that mean, because this is bigger than something else? What's actually really, I'm sure Oliver would blanch if he thought anybody thought he meant this. So we're saying that, are we? We only want second-rate things in Cornwall because that's all we deserve. Is that what we're saying? We want small, underfunded, rather useless, mediocre tourist destinations, do we?
I'm not sure. That's probably not the point that Oliver was making. I think it was probably
it's
because
too big.
Changes the feeling, perhaps the dynamics.
It's 34 acres.
Of the
Van Hydrock is about 1,000 acres. It's a stately home.
Right.
Is that more in keeping with what he would like?
Well, see, I can't speak for Oliver.
I'm just being vicious.
Devil's advocate. So,
I'm just being vicious.
Absolutely.
I'm very unashamed of doing something that's world class.
To try and instigate this argument, certainly.
Yeah, and you did. So you've been successful.
Yeah. Well, Tim, it's been a great pleasure meeting you even, and talking to you, certainly, and you've inspired me this afternoon. Well worth the drive down. Thank you very much, and I hope our paths will cross again sometime.
I'm sure they will. Although, you know what, Woody Allen always said God's idea of a joke was watching humans making plans for the future.
Cheers.
Wow, Rich, that was fantastic.
It was good, wasn't it? It was great. It was a really inspirational bloke to talk to. Because in the end, you know, when we were rattling and having a little bit of heated debate about the pros and cons of Eden, we were kind of sat within 12 inches apart from one another, and looking
sort of alias Smith and Jones,
deep into one another's eyes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's good. Yeah, good opportunity to meet the guy and properly, have a proper rattle.
I agree with him. That's it.
Yeah, I've got to say, I don't agree with everything that he said. Some of his inclinations, I'm not entirely. Can't agree with those entirely, but certainly, you can't knock a blow.
Yeah, but look at the balance. When you look at these complete greenies.
Oh yeah.
If you were really going to be green, why don't we just sit at home, shut the door, never go out?
Whereas
you have to
do
look
something.
at the fantastic
it's all important
impact.
to do something, and to achieve what he's done is formidable.
What do you think, Phil?
I think that Rich doesn't agree with everything that I do, but since I'm right, the same thing applies.
Right, ready for a Hev link? Here we go. Shock jock. From rainforest to rain gardening. We've had an email in from Pat Knott, and she says, do you know anything about rain gardens? Well, we do, but that's next week. Rain gardens are fan-dabby-doozy, and we'll find out about them next week.
In the meantime, here's Monty with his weekly Wormcast.
The Wiggly Wormcast podcast by Monty, a weekly fact on worms. Earthworms have been around 120 million years. They have evolved during the time of dinosaurs. Hominids have been around only about 4 million years, and Homo sapiens about 250,000 years.
Thanks, Mon.
Inspired, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, you said that with conviction, Phil. Poor Phil. Phil asked us, he says, shall I stay or do you want me to go now? He said, oh no, you can stay.
You have some presenters who do links, and you have other presenters who do cutting-edge stuff. There's the difference.